I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and the results have just come in from 2020's full year of sales here in Australia, and the Hilux did it again. It's been the best-selling vehicle in Australia for 5 years in a row, and there's got to be a reason why. We know that the Hilux isn't the most comfortable ute, it's not the fastest, it's not the most refined, and yet it's the one that more Australians buy than any other vehicle in this class. So today I've brought along the new 2021 Toyota Hilux SR5, which for this year now has quite a bit more grunt. 150 kilowatts of power and 500 newton meters of torque from the 2.8 litre turbo diesel engine. Brake towing capacity is up to 3.5 tons. So on paper at least, this is now a more serious, more capable machine, a better rival to vehicles like the Ford Ranger and the Volkswagen Amarok, plus of course the twins, the new D-Max and BT50, and all the other vehicles the Hilux competes with. There's also been a subtle facelift. I think it's a good looking vehicle. The chrome sets off the blue on this SR5 really nicely, new alloy wheel designs as well, and things like new tail lights around the back. Outside at least, the 2021 Hilux is a pretty tidy looking ute in my opinion. There have also been a couple of changes to the interior of the Hilux for 2021. I'm not sure it's quite as cohesive in here. In fact, there are so many different lines and shapes in the cabin of the Hilux that it actually comes across as a bit of a mess compared to the more cohesive cabins of vehicles like the Ranger and Amarok, but still, you've got pretty much everything you need and almost everything is in its place. Now the main change that's going to make life easier is here in the touchscreen. It's still an 8-inch unit, but now Toyota have subbed in wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto for 2021, the first time the Hilux has had those smartphone mirroring technologies. Now it's not wireless, but it's definitely a step up from the position that Toyota had even last year. On the SR5, you also get integrated satellite navigation and DAB digital radio, and those functions all work pretty well. Plus the screen itself is actually quite smartly presented in this sort of slate tablet. Now in front of the driver, you have quite chunky looking analog gauges with a color screen in between that now includes a digital speedo, so that's definitely quite a big help. Plus you get audio and navigation and trip computer functions there too. Now the steering wheel has been maintained. It's quite trucky, quite blocky. It's technically a leather steering wheel, but it doesn't feel like it has a huge amount of leather in it, to be honest. We have these sort of squared off buttons here, the cruise control stalk that Toyota have been using for decades at this point. We've got air vents quite prominently here across the dash, and the air conditioning system in the Hilux works well, controlled by these physical controls and dials down here that make a lot of sense. Now this particular Hilux SR5 has been optioned with a premium interior package, which gives us these black leather seats, power adjustment for the driver, and also heating for both the left and right seats too. And it certainly gives the Hilux a bit of a lift. Without this package, it's about a 59 grand car, just tips it over 60 if you go for the premium interior. And that's probably something that you'd want to do if you're spending this much money on a ute. Now, of course, the SR5 is technically something like a Ranger XLT or potentially a Wildtrak competitor, and it definitely doesn't feel as premium as that sort of vehicle inside. That being said, we haven't yet driven the new Rogue or Rugged X versions of the Hilux, which do carry a little bit more panache as well. In terms of practicality, it's not bad. We've got big cup holders, a tray ahead of those for your phone, no wireless charging however, tray for keys down here, and then a big box between the seats with a household power point, which is always nice functionality to have. The bottle holders are pretty large in the doors, and we've got things like grab handles front and back for when the going gets rougher off-road. And of course, this is a 4x4 dual cab model, which now comes with a locking rear differential as standard for 2021. So all in all, it's a functional place, but certainly not the most premium interior in the dual cab segment. Let's check out the back seat. Now the SR5 does get running boards that will make it easier for people to climb in. The door opens pretty wide, and the space on offer is pretty good for the ute segment, to be honest. In particular, the backrest isn't as upright as it is in some utes like the Amarok, and that makes the Hilux an easier place to spend time in the back. Now for myself, it's 6 foot. Headroom is acceptable. I've got another inch or so. Legroom behind my own driving position is pretty good, and toe room is a little constrained, but not too bad. Now you could get someone in the middle. There is a hump in the floor and it's a bit of a perch, so that's the place the apprentice can go. I personally wouldn't want to ride there. We do have air vents though in the back, and we have hooks on the back of both front seats, which gives you a little bit of extra practicality too, and there are bottle holders in the rear doors. I already mentioned the grab handles, of which there are plenty of fixed handles in the Hilux. The other thing I would mention while I was there is that the headliner is particularly poxy in the Hilux, like it is in virtually any Toyota commercial vehicle, and that's just it's like fingers on a chalkboard for me, this headliner, but all in all, that's pretty slim pickings for criticism back here where the Hilux is quite sufficient. Heading around to the tray, and it's a mixed bag around the back of the Hilux because we've got some good things, some bad things. The SR5 comes with this chrome sports bar as standard, and personally I think that looks pretty good. However, you don't get a tub liner and you don't get any kind of tonneau cover or roll shutter or anything like that you do get on a Ranger at this kind of price point or just above. Now, press vehicles get treated pretty roughly in the course of testing by some people, and this vehicle has 11,000 kilometers on it, and here we can see the effect of not having any protection on the tray at all, and you can see just how scratched up the blue paint on this car is already. So that's the first thing that I would have done if I was buying a Hilux SR5. The tray itself isn't too bad. You won't get a pallet in there like you would in the Amarok, but all in all, the size is competitive. We've got fixed tie down points, so they are at mid-height in the tray rather than on the floor like in some competitors. But all in all, it works fine, though you don't have niceties like a light shining down into the tub as you get on some vehicles. Now, we've still got the classic Hilux rear end, reflective stickers with the Toyota emblem there. It's really just the shape of these tail lights that's changed with the 2021 facelift, and it's a pretty tidy looking vehicle. But how does the 150 kilowatt version drive? That's what we're going to find out next. So what's the updated Hilux like to drive on both road and gravel where I am now, just outside Sydney? Well, it's a better ute to drive. That's the only way you could put it. The Hilux is a very popular vehicle. It's very dependable. Toyota's network across Australia is enormous, and so there are heaps of rational reasons why this car is successful as it is. However, driving dynamics haven't been a part of that really ever. The same has gone for the current generation Hilux, which is competent but not particularly enjoyable to drive in the way that an Amarok has a beautiful 3-litre V6 engine, or a Ranger has sort of specifically Australian tuned ride and handling that makes it especially car-like. But I would say that the 2021 update to the Hilux has definitely closed the gap, particularly in the powertrain department. So the 2.8 litre engine has been, up until this point, hard-working but pretty slow. And the changes that have been made for 2021, which have involved a new turbocharger, a bunch of other mechanical alterations, have added up to quite a difference. Obviously, there's the stuff you can tell on paper. We've got considerably more power and more torque than we did before, up to 150 kilowatts of power from 130 kilowatts earlier, which is a pretty good change. And equally, torque is up to 500 newton meters from 450 newton meters. And so that just gives the Hilux quite a bit more grunt. As a result, brake towing capacity has been up to 3.5 tons, but it means that unladen it actually now feels reasonably quick, and it's just an easier car to drive cross country, particularly because there's just more mid-range torque available. The car doesn't feel as asthmatic in particular. There's just more grunt, more muscularity. It's a pleasant change and certainly a very positive one. Now, the auto has also received some attention, which is great, because up until this point, my advice with the Hilux had been that you really need to buy the manual because the auto's tuning was so bad. It wasn't a case that the manual was particularly brilliant, it's just that the auto really didn't feel up to the job. That's different now. There's new software running through the auto. It prevents the engine from revving out unnecessarily as it tended to before. The Hilux really wanted to rev right out, even though the diesel didn't have much goodness up the top of the rev range, so it was just very noisy for not a lot of ground covered. That has now thankfully been eliminated as a practice, unless you specifically hold the throttle all the way down. Now if you just sort of let it cruise mid-range torque, it's happy to shift earlier. It's still pretty noisy. It still doesn't sound particularly satisfying, but still it is definitely an improved powertrain, one that's easier to work with, and it's also a little bit easier on fuel. Toyota claims 7.9 litres per 100 Ks. You'll probably do somewhere between 9 and 10 driving it normally, as we have done. The manual still does save you a little bit in terms of fuel use, but most people are probably going to continue opting for the automatic transmission, which at least is now improved. Now, in terms of ride and handling, the Hilux is still middle of the pack. In current generation form, it was never that bad and never that good, and that continues to be the case with the 2021 version. It's still not a ute that you aim to punt round corners at 8/10. Very few vehicles in this segment fit that description. Only something like an Amarok or a Ranger really provides much driving pleasure in that regard. But the Hilux is competent at handling. The steering is slow, slower than most rivals, but it's quite deliberate. And you get the result that you ask it to give you. Just don't go expecting it to feel sporty in any way. And then there's the ride, which has been given attention, in particular the unladen ride. Toyota worked on that for this update to the Hilux, and you can tell it's sort of 10 or 20% more compliant unladen, but you could probably sense, from the vibration in my voice, particularly when I was on gravel, it's still stiffer than most utes, definitely stiffer than the new BT50 and D-Max twins, and much stiffer unladen than an Amarok or a Ranger. And that means you really do need to have something in the tub in order for the Hilux to feel reasonably competent and compliant if it's just you in the vehicle. And judging off what I see a lot of unladen Hiluxes on the roads, and so with the standard suspension at least, it's not a particularly comfortable car if you don't have something in the back. Now, refinement is just okay. It's pretty noisy in the cabin, both in terms of engine noise and wind noise rushing over the bluff front end, but it's still at a level I would say is acceptable. And then there's a safety kit, which is pretty impressive. Toyota moved earlier than most in terms of standard safety kit on their dual cab, and the Hilux now has AEB. We've got adaptive cruise control. We've got lane departure warning with braking intervention if the vehicle detects you leaving your lane, and we do have a reversing camera as well. That being said, we don't have a 360-degree parking camera, which can make it easier to maneuver, particularly at low speed. So that's a detailed look at the 2021 Toyota Hilux SR5 with the new 150 kilowatt tune of the 2.8 litre diesel. Thankfully, in this update, Toyota has addressed my three biggest bugbears with the Hilux. That was a lack of power, poor tuning of the 6-speed automatic gearbox in the previous version, and a lack of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto for modern smartphone connectivity. All three of those things have been taken care of. Now, the Hilux still is far from the most special ute in the segment to drive. It's still way off something like the 3-litre V6 you get in the Volkswagen Amarok, for example, and yet it has that core durability to it. It has a certain likability to it, and of course the extra power and torque doesn't go astray. So it wouldn't shock me if in 12 months' time we're talking about the 2021 sales figures, and yet again the Hilux could well be at the top of the tree. But I'm keen to know your feedback. Let me know down below the video whether you'd consider a Hilux, whether you're in one at the moment and might upgrade. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.